debate. We're looking at the coup in the Central African Republic, a nation of 4 million, but with loads of neighboring countries that have interests there. With us to talk about it, France 24's Ebba Kalondo, Julia Owono of Global Voices Online and Internet Without Borders, Internet Sans Frontières, and Emmanuel Dupuy of the Institute for Prospective and Security Studies in England. And joining us from the University of California, Berkeley, anthropologist Louisa Lombard. Welcome back to all of you. Before the break, we were describing how neighboring countries all have a stake in what's going on. Ebba Kalondo, again, we can show the map of the region. Central African Republic may be fragile, but so are quite a number of its neighbors. And you mentioned in part one of our discussion, not just Democratic Republic of Congo and Chad, but there's also Sudan that's not far away. You were talking about poachers who cross, and Uganda. And there are U.S. troops, you were saying, again, who are there.
I think there's so many, the fact that there's so little or very, very poor institutional tools of state power in contemporary Central African Republic politics, and so many divergent interests that, if you will, invade the space of the Central African Republic. You've got now Ugandan troops who've been tracking Joseph Kony of the Lord Resistance Army into the Central African Republic with a UN and AU mandate, by the way, to be able to do so with the support of special forces from the United States. And they've been doing this for a couple of years now. On the other hand, you've also got the economic states of the Central African states who have at least a 700-strong contingent, mostly Chadians, by no mistake at all. And then, of course, you've got this new player on the block in the Central African Republic, that is South Africa, with their 200-strong training contingent, which formed part of a 2007 military agreement with Zuma's government, 2006, agreement. And the thing is, it's a very strong, it's a take where Zuma's politics have veered from what Thabo Mbeki and Nelson Mandela's reign, where involvement of South African troops in African conflicts was always based on a more human rights agenda, where the Zuma regime has taken a much more strategic take on, mineral wealth
And even though on that point, Nelson Mandela is back in hospital, many of the newspapers in South Africa this Thursday not letting up on the killing of those 13 soldiers last weekend. The Sowetan publishing photos of each of them. This is the most South African troops killed since the end of apartheid, and it sort of took a bit of the shine off the opening of the BRICS summit earlier this week. The country's president, Jacob Zuma, found himself fielding reporters' questions more about the Central African Republic than about the BRICS.
We are truly proud of our soldiers. Just over 200 of them fought bandits numbering more than 1,000 people. They fought a high-tempo battle for 9 hours defending the South African military base.
Now, there's been questions asked, were those South African troops there to defend the South African military base? A lot of South Africans, even though this agreement, like you said, has been on the books since 2006, surprised to discover all of this.
Well, some say they were there to protect the presidential palace, in fact, and this is why they were 13 killed and 27 wounded. But I wanted also to add something about the proxy actors. I mentioned Chad for an obvious reason, that the rebellion which comes to power here with the sustain of other potential rebellion coming from Darfur or Chad are the same rebels who have been challenging Chad's authority since 2007, 2008, which came very close to power, very close to overthrow President Deby in 2008. And then you mentioned United States. That's one actor, in fact. The United States has, throughout Africa, now a presence in 35 African states. It is both doing counter-terrorist operation and, of course, tracking Joseph Kony from the Lord's
Resistance Army.
Lord's Resistance Army. I know it in French, of course. So that's one preoccupation. And of course, you have to take in consideration another actor. And this leads us to South Africa, which is China. President Xi Jinping, who is now in South Africa, has said that he is very preoccupied by the situation. He's very preoccupied by the situation. And on the same track, he's saying he's willing to play a mediation role, which is also what South Africa has always been doing. And that allows me to say that that China also has interests in the area. You have to take in consideration that oil concessions is a reality in the western parts of South Sudan and in the southwest of Sudan.
How do people in the wider region feel, Julie Owono, about these new players to the area, relatively new players, China, South Africa?
Could we call them really new players? I mean, the agreement dates with South Africa dates back to 2006, and this makes us realize how much the fate of Bozizé was not really in the hands of the belligerents, but was more in the hands of the regional forces who were involved. Because, as you know, the MICOPAX, the Central African Economic Union forces, did not react to the advance of the rebels, contrary to what happened in December. This is on the one hand. On the second hand, talking about Chad, it is true that some of the elements of the rebellion do have links with Chad, and some of them are even former officers of the Chadian army, which questions the role of Chad in that conflict. It is too easy to say that because Chad was busy in Mali, it did not play a role in Central African Republic. I think we can make a link here.
I didn't quite say that. I was saying that it allowed the rebels to advance faster because the Chadian army was
otherwise engaged.
Engaged and politically dedicated to another
I would probably
area.
suggest that, and it has been a suspicion for several years now, that Chad probably did give logistic support to the rebellion, because if you read sometimes the WikiLeaks cable, which are a great source of information sometimes, most of the time I would even say, one of these cables stated in 2009, a U.S. embassy officer stated that at that time, within the elements of the rebellion, there had elements from 4 officers with uniforms from Chad, which does question the role of that country in that. And the last thing I wanted to point out was it's probably too early to say that France-Afrique has nothing to do with it. I think it's much more complicated, and probably the future will give us some more elements. Because if you look, now President Deby has gained international credibility because he's been so useful in the Mali conflict. In the meantime, one of his former allies, which is Bozizé, who was held by Deby, as we explained at the beginning, to overthrow Patassé at that time. Now that same Chad is involved also in the overthrowing of President Bozizé, according to suspicion expressed by foreign powers, and as it has been dealt with by Ebba. There is a huge power competition at the moment in Central African Republic. The fact that the oil exploration, I mean, the oil reserves are been underneath the ground is not a hindrance for oil exploration. It has never been. It's not an excuse. So yes, there are challenges.
It is more remote than most oil exploration sites, though.
No, but it has never been a hindrance.
But this has never been a hindrance for people to actually bet on a political power that could have a chance of surviving.
Absolutely, and even Bozizé, even though he was at that time threatened of being overthrown, he even said in a speech, and it should be interesting to read that speech again. He said, I was invited by Total. I told them that they could have oil exploration. I stated that speech in one of my articles for Global Voices Online. He said that, okay, I went to meet Total in Paris and told them that they could have this oil exploration contract, but we didn't agree, and so I gave it to the Chinese, and that's why they're attacking me. That's what Bozizé said. I'm not saying it's true. Of course, a dictator, when he's threatened, it's always the fault of everybody else except his fault. But nevertheless, there should be an interpretation, a different interpretation, and it's very early to say that France-Afrique is over, or it is a wish of everybody, and I totally agree with Hollande's decision not to send troops to protect that dictator, but at the same time, we should have an objective analysis and take some distance from all the protagonists.
Louisa Lombard?
Oh, I was just going to say that, I mean, with this whole oil story, it's a very complicated story. And one factor that we haven't discussed yet is actually another American factor in that oil exploration story. And there was an American oil magnate, Jack Grinberg, who had negotiated a concession to exploit that oil with the Patasse government back in 2002. When Patasse was removed from power by Bozizé, that agreement was effectively rendered null and void, and Grinberg was forced out of the area. There was a whole long international arbitration process, and the end result was that Grinberg lost his concession but was going to be paid huge damages by the Central African government.
Right,
now, Grinberg never got those damages, and there have been persistent rumors, I think fairly credible rumors, that Grinberg has also been among the actors who has been at least providing some kind of support to the rebels.
Okay, that's the one allegation put out there.
But doesn't just tell you, with so many disparate actors, I think it would be...
Well, let's bring it back to a country that you know well, okay. South Africa. A newspaper, The Times, looks at how a South African oil company by the name of Divine Intervention, that's the name of the company, has strong interest there. The paper writes in a front-page story entitled "Scramble for CAR Minerals" that other companies linked to large-scale oil prospecting in the region, including an oil lake in the neighboring DRC that stretches to the southern region of CAR, are owned by Jacob Zuma's nephew, Kubulubze Zuma. Both these companies are registered in the Virgin Islands. Doesn't mean, of course, that Jacob Zuma is in any way involved, but the Mail and Guardian, another South African newspaper, goes further this Thursday in a piece entitled, "Is This What Our Soldiers Died For?" It points to a Congolese-born middleman by the name of Didier Pereira, with strong ties to several top ANC officials. And basically the article describes how there was this attempted deal to sell weapons to Bozizé. An ANC spokesperson has reacted with an emphatical denial. Jackson Mtembu saying, "We're not in the business of diamonds, we're in the business of politics." But as we see in the newspaper business, they say this is a story that has legs on it. People in South Africa are asking a lot of questions, it seems, of the ANC.
Well, the story of Khulubuse, who's all of 29 years old, came out in a very big way in South Africa through the DRC, with his DRC holdings, and how the fact that he was pushed ahead by his uncle, and not much attention was given to the CAR part of his business dealings.
Now, how much of a dent, though, is it going to be for the ANC and for the government of Jacob Zuma? Just at a time when, again, this is his big moment this week, hosting the BRICS summit.
I think it's fair to say that Jacob Zuma is a survivor up until now. It depends really on how the South African media want to take the story ahead, if they can take it further ahead.
If they can take it further.
If they can take it further ahead.
Emmanuel Dupuy?
Yes, I wanted to add something in the debate, is the mediation part. Seleka will be needing international sustain. Seleka has already said that he's going to apply what was decided in Libreville a few months ago, which is a 3 years election, which is a national union government. This is why the Prime Minister is still...
3 years.
Well, this was what was decided. I hope it will be before that. This is only what was on the paper. Now, I wanted to add something concerning South Africa and Zuma. Zuma is in a weird, awkward position. He has the legacy of Thabo Mbeki and Nelson Mandela, mediation all over Africa. Peace player. He knows now that with the arrival of the former Minister of Justice in Addis Ababa, he cannot play this role anymore. So he's looking for anything which would fulfill and which would restrain this new role. And as you mentioned it, it is not only because there is a BRICS summit in South Africa, but also because the other player, President Compaoré in Burkina Faso, is very weakened, and President Bozizé also played this role. So we may be seeing in the future that South Africa, and this is why I think the media are forcing the fact that there has been huge dedication in Central Africa. They will be eager to play a more, how should you say,
oversight function.
Oversight function, or I could touch a more intermediation role, and this is why the Chinese president said they was willing to play this game with South Africa.
But this is interesting in the sense that if the Chinese are this interested and getting worried when people are starting to elbow each other...
There's another reason why they're worried.
Of course.
Because they are building a huge arms capacity in that area. As you know, there is an arms factory in Uganda, and most of the weapons used by Seleka provide from that, from this factory.
Exactly.
You have to take that into
consideration. And then you
consideration.
ask yourself, like you say, the legacy of Zuma, Thabo Mbeki and Nelson Mandela, really all the type of mediations within African conflicts were really ruled by a certain human rights agenda. Whereas with Zuma, it has been
realistic. It's more realistic agenda.
Yes, you could be realistic if you want, but it's always been led by very primal, basic strategic interests.
Julie Owono, I'm interested to know how do you think Cameroonians, Cameroon, a neighbor of Nigeria, another big power, how do they feel about South Africa's presence in the Central African Republic?
Wow. Well, first of all, we should ask how Cameroon does feel about the Central African Republic case. We remember that
Bozizé is now in exile there.
He's in exile, but there are negotiations for him to exit quietly from Cameroon because he's finally a very dangerous refugee, because we never know. Instability could cross the border and threaten the 30-year peaceful Cameroon. But this said, we remember that during the Libreville talks, President of Cameroon was not in Libreville, so he did not discuss. I mean, he probably had agreed with all these dignitaries prior to his trip to Europe, but he was not in Central African Republic. And now again, it's probably an accident of agenda, but he was in Turkey when the coup was happening.
Right, so we've yet to hear the official line out of Cameroon. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. But I want to thank you, Julie Owono. I want to thank Ebba, Kalondo, Emmanuel, Dupuy, and for joining us from Berkeley, California, Louisa, Lombard. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.